Good afternoon, greetings to all those who have joined us from around the world. It's a pleasure to host this webinar. We are focusing on a book, and this is Rob van den Berg, the book Evidence for Hope, who really is talking about the emerging sustainability revolution in 2024. It has its origins in the unprecedented challenges that humanity faces. The main argument is that while everything seems to move in the wrong direction, we have a hope of optimism. There is a change happening in the right direction as well. Van den Berg notes that this change is inevitable and that will lead to a new energy revolution of humanity. After the agricultural revolutions, the industrial revolution, and the information revolution, humanity is now on the verge of starting the sustainability revolution. I will just echo what I wrote in terms of my review, that the depth and scope of this book makes it a seminal contribution to science, research, philosophy, and evaluation. It draws us into the multiple worldviews to help us understand how thinking evolves. As a historian, academic, evaluation manager, practitioner, and commentator, Rob merges arguments in an accessible manner, and it should inform future practice. So the objective of this is for Rob to do a presentation and to have responses. We have two very distinguished respondents. We have Professor Jo Puri, Adjunct Professor at Columbia University, and Dr. Juha Uitto, a visiting scholar at the Environmental Lab Institute and former director of the independent evaluation of the GEF, the Global Environmental Facility. It is expected that we have practitioners and participants, but without further ado, given the time we have, I will now hand over directly to Rob to make a presentation, and then we would have the contribution, then insights from our two respondents. Over to you, Rob, and all of you, welcome to the seminar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Indran, and thanks for this introduction. And I indeed would want to go quite quickly into the substance. So I will be sharing my screen. Let me see whether is my the PowerPoint visible? Probably not yet. No. Okay. So I need to find the. Wait a second. Share. There I have it. And now it should be visible. Is that okay? Yeah.
Yes.
Well, you all can see it. Okay. Good. So I'm going to talk about the book and the evidence for hope that I note. And a counterpoint would be that most of the evidence that we currently see is evidence for despair. Climate change, war, conflicts, poverty, exploitation, and so on. And also what seems to go well and where we are rich as a humanity, we also know that the rich societies are unsustainable in the longer run. We overshoot what the world is producing, and human societies should actually use no more resources in a year than what Earth can provide. And there's ample evidence that humanity can actually tackle these challenges, as has been proven in tests, experiments, pilot projects, and so on. And this is the evidence for hope, and evaluation has played a large role in this. So our role is one as evaluators next to science institutions, national bureaus of statistics, the informed public, and so on. We know where Earth is heading, and we know especially the policies and interventions well as evaluators. And it's in these policies and interventions that solutions to the climate crisis, for example, is researched. So national systems of monitoring, evaluation, and learning have now been set up in many countries, yet efforts at evidence synthesis or meta-evaluation are rare. and especially evaluations at the nexus of development and environment can show us what is possible, evidence for hope. And as 10 years of experience as director of the GEF Independent Office of Evaluation, I have the evidence for hope. And my successors have seen even more evidence. And perhaps Juha can say a bit about that in his intervention. But so somehow I was muted. Did you miss much? Should I go back to the previous slide?
We didn't miss much, Rob. We could hear you pretty well.
Okay. Look, so let's, one thing to really take care of is that we need to agree on evidence. And a complex series of issues have led people and countries to ignore evidence. Social media bubbles promoting conspiracy evidence, naive concepts of evidence. Countries and peoples need to act now on complex questions for which the evidence of the past does not provide the solution. A fast-growing number of scientists support systems complexity and composite and complex causal relationships, but this has not yet entered the public debate sufficiently. Evidence is more than facts and data. It needs interpretation. It needs context, insight, and knowledge, and a forward-looking perspective. And for this reason, I propose that evidence is to be redefined as the reasoned judgment of observations, explanations, and expectations. So both the past, the present, and the future should be in there. And we need to also agree then on sustainability, because what we clearly see is that our societies are not sustainable in the longer run. And in fact, one could say that what we are doing as societies is run forward to the next solution of the problems that we create. So we've managed to solve many problems of the past, and I mentioned a few here, but there are new problems that are making our future very uncertain. Our current world is characterized by overusing the resources and a wide range of sustainability crises. And in order to tackle these, we need to agree on causality and systems. The Global West introduced reductionist perspectives on science in the world. And to study something, it had to be cut off from the rest of the world. And this would lead to research of linear, simple causality, A causing B. But everything is connected, and simple causality does not exist. Instead, we have composed and complex causality, as we have seen in systems science. The simple linear perspective has led to overlooking how the social, economic, and environmental domains are related. And if we look at the current interaction of the three domains of Agenda 2030, we see that the social domain is in service of the economic domain, and the environmental domain likewise. And this leads to breaking through planetary boundaries. We have this overview of the update in 2023 of the planetary boundaries, and you see where we go through these boundaries. Going through the boundaries is more or less a death sentence in the longer run, because humanity will not survive this. And there are three barriers still in place, or boundaries not yet overcome. But ocean acidification mentioned here as one of the planetary boundaries, that planetary boundary is gone. We have already in 2 years' time gone over that barrier. What we need to go to is that the social domain and the environmental domain in service of the economic domain, we need to move from exploitation to integration. So we need to go to 3 domains with sustainable interactions. And then we see some good news emerging. Well, perhaps bad news first, or this is actually an issue of interpretation. We see that humanity is moved more by concerns about energy and money than the SDGs and the Paris Agreement. And there is one government at the moment that clearly exemplifies this and makes it very clear for any reader where their priorities lie. Good news is that renewable energy is becoming cheaper than fossil fuels. This has already happened. I note 4 tipping points, and 2 of these tipping points are solar power and wind power, and actually the tipping points lie about 10 years in the past. So these are quite certain. And even better news is that renewable energy is local and can be democratized. Households and communities take their own decisions on energy sources. The country in which I'm living, the Netherlands, the energy market for households is for 40% in the hands of the households. They decide on the energy that they will consume. Electric cars is mentioned as a tipping point. And the tipping point that is potentially the most promising is batteries to store energy. And there is so much happening that I would like to guess that there is no good overview at the moment. There are so many new initiatives on batteries that we'll see something emerging from this in the next 10 years. Combine these points and more upcoming tipping points will lead to the 3rd energy revolution. And this is inspired by geographers Lewis and Maslin, who have written the energy history of mankind. This slide is just for your information, not to be read, but there's the precise information about these tipping points is here, and if this presentation is made available, you can actually have a good look at this. And of course, there is more in the book. Now, how do these big revolutions happen? The agricultural, industrial, and information revolutions happened without the involvement of governments and societies. They did not take decisions on these. They happened because of their internal dynamics. People saw the advantage of growing crops, using machinery, using digital platforms, and likewise, the sustainability revolution will happen because people will recognize that a sustainable future is cheaper and better. They don't realize this at this moment in time, but we see already the emerging contours of a sustainable future coming up. The fossil fuel industry will not succeed in stopping the sustainability revolution. While fossil fuels made a few companies and countries very rich, the new energy revolution will be decentralized and will deliver an abundance of local energy. And evaluation should prepare for this new perspective and should be aware of what is happening. And evaluators have actually a problem in this regard. If you're focused on government's action and local and national and regional interventions, you are actually focusing on the issues that are being guided by government and guided by the people. But what I'm saying here is that these big revolutions are guided by the systems that are in place. And people just will not fully realize what is happening because they are not providing the guidance for this process. So if we look then at energy investment trends, we see that the world now invests almost twice as much in clean energy as it does in fossil fuels. Households have contributed to more than 40% of the increased investments in clean energy. But an affordable transitioning away from fossil fuels requires a further rebalancing of investments, especially in the global south. And there is an exception. China has already chosen this road to go through and is thus quite an exception in the global south. And additional and affordable financing needs to be promoted. Then the multilateral banks could play a role. Currently, they provide 1% of funds. But the question is whether they use the funds in the way to promote this kind of revolution that is taking shape. So if we look at issues to explore, we of course will immediately note that after the energy revolution, we need a consumer revolution. Agricultural products needs to change, clothes, houses, buildings, enterprises, and markets, all towards sustainability. We need to start identifying more trajectories of markets, of innovation, of social entrepreneurship, and of ecosystems. And evaluators can support this by not just noting how successful an intervention is, but how it fits into trajectories that will bring us a sustainable future. Evaluation criteria like efficiency, effectiveness, and impact are often still studied as linear phenomena per intervention. They need to be redefined in terms of relationships. So this is my overview of what is currently happening. It's currently happening without involvement of governments, public interventions. It's happening because the systems more or less open this up for us. And many people are clever enough to take their opportunities. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much, Rob, for your quick overview of a very deep and exciting text. It now gives me pleasure to call upon Dr. Jo Puri to respond and provide a set of comments on the book. Over to you, Jo.
Thank you very much. For a book that I have to say, when I first picked it up, I thought, well, it's going to be, one of those dry evaluation books. But frankly, it combined three great attributes that I really loved about it. One, it thought about systems. Second, it gave a historical perspective of, the journey that we are taking, not just in terms of evaluation, but how we're thinking about evidence and science. But the third part, and frankly, the part that really was most interesting for me, and which is why I would really advocate that this book be read by anyone who's coming into the evidence, into the evaluation space, is because it was so personal as well. You really combined a lot of your insights on science, on knowledge, on evaluation, on evidence with a lot of your personal experience. And I really loved reading your evolution as, starting with the Dutch ministry and then going to the Jeff and then post Jeff, and then a lot of your conversations and the conundrums that we as evaluators deal with. A lot of it also resonated and, inspired in me sort of a thinking back to, what was the challenge that I had to deal with when I was the head of the Independent Evaluation Office at the Green Climate Fund. And you were very much one of my rapid fire, call options every time I was in a conundrum, because you also provided so much of the wisdom and in terms of real world challenges that one has to deal with when you are both forming an evaluation function as well as taking it forward. So that's the first point I wanted to make about the book. And just to say that, please, anyone who has a chance, please read it. The second reason I really liked, and it's sort of coming out from the overarching comments I made about the book, is that because you're looking at this with a historic perspective, you provide a political economy of evidence, right? So currently, and it's sort of interspersed right from the beginning. You provide sort of the role and definition of evidence, the confusions that exist there, but also allude to a lot of the real world challenges that we are dealing with today in the space of evidence and data, which are related to ghosting and washing. And it made me think about how we've seen this evolution from evidence-based decision-making to hopefully evidence-based decision-making, but also a lot of the challenges that we are seeing here. And I think within that, the focus on sustainability and the fact that you're really thinking about these three domains, which need to be adaptive and resilient, while also talking about causal inference and acknowledging that causal inference is important, but it's not the only thing. And we'll talk a little bit. I'll very quickly come to the part that I possibly have a few other differences possibly with you. But I really love the fact that you spoke about sustainability and the interaction of these three systems. And it made me reflect on also how the new OECD evaluation criteria now have sustainability and cohesion within them. But the one other thing that you speak about, but you don't possibly advocate for, is equity, right? You look, because you provide a lot of the historical perspective on imperialism, on colonialism, and the way the world order has changed. It forces, I think, the reader to think about what should be the other and normative standards that we use as part of evaluation criteria. And clearly, equity is one of them that I really want to put out on the table for everyone who's listening as part of the evaluation community, that now that the OECD criteria have changed, have included sustainability and cohesion, we should be thinking about equity and equality. And that should be a criterion as well. And evaluation is exactly the right space, inspired also by Rob's book, that should include this normative value. The last comment on the sort of the wonderful attributes of the book, although this is definitely not meant to be comprehensive, but I just wanted to sort of divide my thoughts into three comments and then three comments, because you speak about the importance of communication, and so I wanted to keep to that discipline. And the last one is really that you also talk about evaluation as a positive force, right? For evaluation 1.0, a lot of evaluation has seen itself, and I had to deal with this even when I was at the GCF or even at 3IE, was evaluation was backward looking. You looked at past data and you sort of said, oh, does it work or not? And then essentially just stopped there. What I really liked is that you're really exhorting and provoking the reader to think about evaluation as a positive strategic force, which is future looking. And that, I think, has to be the new standard for evaluation 2.0, where we start to think about evaluation as a strategic force. And I have to confess that part of this was also, also in conversation with you and many others on this call, was also what was in my mind when I became Vice President of Strategy and Knowledge, that I wanted to use my evaluation skills to also look forward, but you really articulated it extremely well. So I really loved it. Three things, therefore, I'm just going to say for your next book, Rob, if you want to think about it. And I really, because you've got such an interesting way of writing and making it so personal and still building in your erudition, I really think you should have, a second part to this book as well. So I think really reflecting on first, so 3 points here as well. First, I think really reflecting on the fact that, and you talk about tipping points, but we are at a tipping point or a decision point for evidence and evaluation today. And that is because we've got so much technology. We've got AI, we've got data, all sorts of data. Where and how should evaluation and evidence really take on and embrace this? One of the challenges, and I have to confess, while I was still at IFAD and I just finished about a month ago, one of the big questions that we asked within IFAD was, well, now that we have AI and computing power and all of these so-called data sets, do we really need to generate new evidence? And I think that, it's people like you and Indran and Juha and many others here. We've got to push for an even increasing and more important role of evaluation and evidence in this space. Because unless our technologies are able to train themselves on new generated evidence and data, then all of the large language models are always going to be looking at a very small cross-section of data that we already have, which is not good. So I think there's a greater need today for evaluation and evidence to play an important role. And, your insights on this would be great. The second thing I think has to be to understand as to how evaluation and evidence can really inform completely new markets. I mean, in other fora, I've spoken about data and evidence being used to create a market for resilience. Much like we've got a market for carbon, we can also have a market for resilience and resilience credits. And I think that because we've got such good data, which is disaggregated, which is representative, which is triangulated, and it's coming from all sides, and you speak about this in your book as well, we've got to start to think about how evidence and data can create completely new markets. ESG is clearly an example of that. And so really pushing it in that direction. And the third and the last point, I think I really would like to get your insights, Rob, on what works in making evidence and evaluation be effective. And the large part of the book is really devoted to it, that, people don't always look at evidence and evaluation. You've really got to frame it, and you speak about this really eloquently. But I think we've got to make it a science. Really, what works systematically to get people to take on evaluation almost as par for the course? How can we make that a science? And I would really like, that direction to be taken by your next book. So with that, thank you so much, Indran, and thanks so much, Rob, and congratulations again.
Thank you very much, Jo, for the insightful comments and provocative comments, which I would like Rob also to respond to at the end. I now move across the globe and call upon Dr. Juha Uitto to give his commentary on the book. Over to you, Juha.
Thank you, Indran. First of all, let me start by congratulating Rob for this excellent book, and it's a very original book in its take on these issues, and like Jo was saying just now, so the style is breezy and nice with this, the personal touch, but there's so much substance in the book also that it's really a delight to read, and I recommend it to evaluators, but also many others. One of the strengths, of course, is the fact that you put it into a kind of a philosophical framework, or the philosophical traditions and the historical perspective. And you didn't talk much in your presentation about the importance of these worldviews, but that's an important part of the book, I think, how we have moved from, or are in the process of moving from, a worldview that wants to sustain economic growth towards a more sustainable, integrated worldview. And that's very, very important, although, of course, as we know, so it is somewhat now challenged by worldviews of populism, anti-globalism, conspiracies, and so forth. Your definition of evidence is also very important here. I think that's at the heart of it. Evidence is not only data. Evidence is how you interpret that data and how you understand the data in terms of explanations and expectations, as you say. So when you have observations of what has happened, what does the data actually say, you need an theory. You need an explanation of why this is happening, and if the observations and explanation match, you can create a hypothesis about which way to go in the future. I'm not sure I'm making any justice to your elaborate chapter on this issue, but basically, I do share your hopeful perspective on the future, although we obviously have many challenges, and we're not out of the woods yet. I said it earlier that when I started in this business longer ago than I wish to remember, there was a general optimism about development and countries getting richer and people getting richer and poverty being left behind. But what has happened actually has been a kind of a bifurcation of countries where you do have a lot of these formerly developing countries that have moved into middle income status, while others have sunk into fragility, conflict, violence, vulnerability, all of that. So that challenge remains, and we live in a world of extraordinary inequality also, and it's not only between countries, but it is within countries and within rich countries also, which is a very important aspect of sustainability also. But also, most countries, if not all countries in the world, have signed up to this Paris Agreement and climate pledges and so on, and to reach net zero emissions sometime between 2035 and 2070. But so lots of things are happening, but at the same time, I don't believe that we can stop climate from changing through these national voluntary reductions and movements to net zero and just the behavioral change in that regard. So, and there's of course this issue that still, although the finance, both from public and private sources to climate-friendly development and environmentally friendly development, sustainability is higher than it has ever been. it still is dwarfed by subsidies to environmentally destructive practices, whether it's fossil fuels or it's agriculture that destroys ecosystems and so forth. And you, Rob, you have talked about it earlier in other contexts also about this, what you called micro-macro paradox, where we have a lot of projects that are doing very well, but the overall trends have still been downwards. But so one of the things here is that, you know, I think we can't, like you say, we can't rely only on government action here, and we can't rely only on commitments to net zero. We need to look beyond that. And one of the things is, of course, technology. There are lots of technological developments which, if they take off, they make sense for the private sector, and they will make sense for the public to adopt. So we have to look into those. And the other thing is that I think that we have to look beyond the global West. You mentioned that there are countries like China that are leading the world currently in things like renewable energy and related technologies. We have to learn from those, and we have to try to emulate some of these things. So, like you said, and you say in your book that the Western science perspective has been quite reductionist and has led to a linearity of thinking and two-dimensionality in thinking, and we have to, as evaluators, we have to also move beyond that. We have to look into the complex systems. We have to look into the interconnections between the spheres, between the systems, as you talk about them, the coupled natural and human systems in which we all operate. And we have to look at these nexus points where we can make a difference. I mean, sustainable development, if it happens at the nexus of these human and natural systems. And when we identify where the nexus is, or nexi, how do you say in Latin, interact, where they happen, and that's where we potentially can make a difference. So I think that we do have to focus beyond government action. We have to focus beyond the global West. We have to have a future perspective, like Jo was just emphasizing. We can't just afford to, go 5 years afterwards and evaluate and say what should have been done differently 5 years ago. That's not a good way. But I am also convinced that that evaluation can play a much more proactive role and much more creative role in looking into future options and looking into scenarios, which way the world would go if we followed certain kinds of initiatives. Evaluation is not a panacea. It's part of an ecosystem in which we operate and where we learn lessons and where we analyze things. But it can be a very powerful one. So yeah, let's keep on moving evaluation to the right direction also. So thanks very much once again.
Thank you very much. You are also for very insightful comments. And just for the audience that we have online, which is quite substantial, we'll be making a recording of this. Both Juha and Jo have written several books, which illustrates their commitment to advancing the profession and also advancing the thinking. At this stage, I'll give Rob maybe 3 minutes on a quick response to the commentary from Jo and Juha, and then open for questions. We have quite a few questions online, which I'll pose over to you. Over, Rob.
Yes, thank you very much. Too many compliments, and I feel honored but also humble. And the quick reaction indeed would be on Jo's comments. Equity. Yes, equity is of key importance. And at the end of the book, I actually ask attention for the initiatives for just transitions. The just refers to social equity. It doesn't refer to legal systems. It's really focused on solving poverty, on solving the great social issues that we face. And there are very good results coming out of these just transition operations, initiatives, because these are initiatives where people start talking to each other about what kind of future they would like to have. And they have also to do with another thing that was mentioned by Jo, which is markets, how to reorganize markets. Because if you move from fossil fuel industry to renewable energy, and it's a completely different game. As I mentioned, households are taking over, local communities are taking over. So you have other actors, you have other products being put on the market, and it's going to be very interesting to continue to follow this and to write more about just transition, which I certainly aim to do. A second issue where Juha raised the problem of, are we really going forward in the right direction? I'd like to refer back to the situation as it was 15 years ago, when we had calculations from IMF and the World Bank that for every dollar spent by governments on subsidies for renewable energy, at the same time, these governments would spend $100 for fossil fuel subsidies. So that was way out of, there was no, it seemed you could end up in despair and say, well, we will never be able to change this. But right now, the difference is something like 1 to 4 or 1 to 3. So still $3 are going to fossil fuels and $1 to renewable energy. But in the meantime, overall investments in renewable energies is now twice as much as overall investment in fossil fuels. And we can predict the winning of renewable energy. Not right now, there's still huge systems of fossil fuels, but fossil fuels are becoming more expensive and more expensive with each new discovery of another bell of gas or whatever, somewhere 3 miles under the ocean, that where it's very difficult to get this out and very expensive and so on. So we have to be aware of these trends, and evaluators, I think, should really be aware of those. And that was also my appeal in this book. Please be aware of what's happening beyond the government intervention that you are evaluating. So thank you.
Thank you, Rob. And now over to the colleagues online. If you could raise your virtual hand and pose questions. Harold, good to see you again.
Hello, Indran. Hello, colleagues. Good to see you all. Thank you, Rob. It's interesting to hear your presentation of the book. I have visited it somewhat since its publication, and indeed it presents a credible picture of a very large narrative of human and earthly destiny. At the same time, I think it brings to the table also a credible voice for evaluation and evaluators being able to intervene in the course of history. My concern is that we're in a little bubble all of our own, speaking to our own converts. My question to you is, what's been the reactions of the world historians, philosophers, and heads of state?
Thank you, Arnold. Maybe we take another question or two and then give Arnold a chance, Rob a chance to come through. Inga, good to see you online. Would you like to ask a question? Okay, I have a question online. This comes from Sarah Cruz from the Pan American Health Organization, PAHO. What do you mean by rethinking evaluation criteria through the lens of relationships? Over to you, Rob.
Okay, well, first, Arnold, many thanks for your comments. Yes, I'm completely aware that evaluators on their own will not change the world. So there is, but there are potential large groups of people and scientists and politicians who are thinking in these directions as well. And where I feel that we as evaluators need to support what they are already developing. And what we can do as evaluators is help with evidence about where societies are going and where markets are going and where the world is going. And so that we shore up the evidence side of this whole issue. And we're not the only ones in this. So we should really collaborate with scientists, with politicians of certain parties, depending on how this is going. And we should really see whether we can have a joint perspective. In the meantime, the issue, or the second issue, I forgot who actually asked this, but you mentioned that, Indran, so I'm sure you will do that again. The issue of how to change the criteria from, let's say, a linear approach to a relationship approach. Well, to some extent, the criteria have always been about relationships, the relationship between effectiveness and impact, for example, between efficiency and effectiveness, and so on. But the way that this has been researched by evaluators has been rather linear. If we see this efficiency, we will see that effectiveness. But the effectiveness depends, of course, on all kinds of other circumstances that are in which an activity is taking place. So we can see the paradox of successful projects that had hardly any efficiency, or very efficient projects that have no impact. And this is all part of looking at the context in which, and this is why I advocated that evaluators should look at the trajectories of systems rather than just at the intervention. Okay, I think those were the two. Indran, over to you.
Oh, thank you very much, Rob. Insightful as always. Inga, good to see you online. Your question, please.
Thank you, Indran, and thank you for the invitation. And thank you, Rob, for your book. I haven't read it yet, but I will and come back to you with some more thorough thinking. So I've tried to listen carefully here now. And as a culture anthropologist, I miss the word culture. I miss the word heritage. You talk about the dimension of social, economic, and environmental. And social, the closest then to culture, is not culture. And economy, who is actually driving, what is actually driving all of these three dimensions, that those are cultural values. And then at the beginning of your talk, you said, the past can't help us. Of course, the past can't help us per se. But then you elaborated and said, we need to talk about or see or use the past, the present, and the future. Wonderful. And you and I have had long discussions on that. I thank you also, Juha and you, for your comments. Juha, you talk about normative values. Again, we are into culture. And so you can't get away with it if you would like really to be integrative, holistic in your views. And then just a final comment. Is there a danger of false hope here, Rob? And you know me, I'm reading Roger Scruton and all of these other intellectuals, the uses of pessimism. So those are entangled questions of me, but I think you can understand what I'm trying to grasp here.
Certainly.
Thank you very much, Inga. While Rob is responding to your very pertinent observations, I'm going to ask Juha and Jo to think of perhaps 2 or 3 concepts that we as researchers and evaluators need to keep in mind, given the complexity that we are facing right now in terms of a tension between science and non-science. Thank you. Rob.
Okay. Yes, Inga-Lill, you confess that you haven't read the book. And yes, indeed, there are at least 3 chapters in which I fully go into the history of what happened in the world since 1500. So a long time perspective, and the word culture is not really evident, but all kinds of cultural notions are there. And that links also to the earlier remark that Juha made about worldviews, that you had expected me to to raise the worldviews in this presentation as well. And there is simply too much in the book to really present everything. And the one thing that I wanted to do in this presentation was to tackle the point that Inga-Lill, you raised of is there no scope for pessimism in this? And indeed, I found it very interesting to see that the world is becoming worse and worse. And at the same time, you see these emergence of new practices and new issues that are, or new ways of doing business that really are very hopeful. So we have a divided world. And what I see, am I a pessimist? No, definitely not. Am I an optimist? No, I'm not an optimist. I'm a realist. I basically see things happening where I think we as evaluators need to know this and need to take it up and need to not accept that the government says you will only report on the efficiency of this intervention, but will say in which context this is taking place and what you see in the context. So that is my appeal, and culture is definitely there, but there are so many things that are definitely there. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Rob. Well, you've got other books to write, so you're getting the topics here that's coming through. Comments now from Jo on key takeaways, issues that we need to watch as evaluators and researchers, because that's the audience of this. And then the same question to Juha. Jo, over to you.
Yeah, in anticipation, I was actually quickly scribbling also, hearing some of the comments. And so my 3 points here, also responding to what Inga and Arul said. I think, Rob, while you may not be a pessimist or an optimist and you're a realist, but I don't think that you should be an apologist. I think your book actually is giving hope to a lot of us, because I think what it's also talking about is that evaluation, and I can talk about this from my own experience, also has given me a paradigm within which to think about both what Inga spoke about, culture and values on one side, and forward-looking action on the other, and almost everything. And after I sort of moved my own career towards far more operations from the evaluation space, but frankly, evaluation as a tool has been really indispensable in thinking about strategic thinking and how to take organizations forward. So I think that gives us an opportunity and an excuse for hope. That's one. The second thing, while we may say that evaluation doesn't tell us what to do with the future, actually evaluation, there is this idea of incremental action in Japanese, and Juha can talk about this, Kaizen, small little actions every day. And I translate that to apply to evaluation to say that evaluation gives us small, important, evidence-based insights, which then, add one to the other, and then they lead to what Thomas Kuhn said was the tipping point, right? Leads to scientific revolutions. And that's what I think is also the other source of hope that I think evaluation as a discipline gives us, that I really would like, people within this discipline to take forward. And the last point I wanted to make is, in the areas that I think evaluation can still push us forward, other than the normative, the importance of equity, I really cannot overemphasize it. But the other one is what the evaluation discipline is doing today, which is trying to understand how to do things better. It's not just about saying, oh, this is your report card, you're bad or good. It's not a 1 or 0. It's also about saying, how could you implement better? What is the plumbing, as Esther Duflo calls it? What is the plumbing that you require to do things better? And I think evaluation is moving in that direction in an inexorable way. And I really do think that we need to hold on to it in as steadfast a way as possible. Thank you. Back to you, Indran.
Thank you very much, Jo. Juha?
Thanks. I try to be quick, but I'll start with the reaction to this to the evaluation criteria and how they could be different. I fully agree with Rob that evaluators should be more aware of the context and the larger trajectories and so on. But in practice, we will still be asked to evaluate interventions. So one simple way of modifying your evaluation criteria is that, instead of asking, was this intervention effective in achieving its objectives, you can ask whether this intervention was effective in achieving good things for people and the planet. So add, both the natural and the human systems to the question. You can ask, you can look into, what we most often forget about as evaluators is to look into what what happens to the natural systems, what happens to the environment, what happens to what are the climate impacts, biodiversity impacts. So add those questions to a project evaluation, if you wish. So two takeaways from my part, in addition to what has been said, it would be this thing that we have to really understand what's going on in beyond the government. And Rob has said this a couple of times today. But there are so many actors that can be very powerful. You talked about the households and all of that. But for example, cities. And we see it on this side of the pond that, you know, we have a large discrepancy now with you know, the government, the federal government policies that are, you know, saying one thing, but then you have a lot of cities, for example, who say that, okay, fine, we don't need the federal government here, we will go our way in any case. States can do the same, and of course you have the private sector and the markets. The second thing, my takeaway would be looking at the technologies. I really think that we you know, in the environmental movement, there's a strain of luditism, which is basically saying that, okay, technology is bad and it's dangerous and so on, and it can be dangerous. But if we just let things like climate change to continue as they are now continuing, that's dangerous too. We know that risk very well. So look into also innovative technologies, whether it is carbon capture or it's ocean biomass enhancement or whatever. You know, you have interesting technologies that can actually reduce carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Of course, you have to do very strong environmental impact assessment. And you have to be very clear of the unintended consequences. And you also have to look into the social license, if you wish, the what happens to people and especially the vulnerable groups, you know, the small farmers and fishermen and women and indigenous peoples and so on. But don't just categorically say, no, we shouldn't go that way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juha, and colleagues online. We've had a very good turnout from across the globe. There will be a comprehensive news item going out on the IOE media within the next day or two. But take the opportunity again to thank Rob for his contribution to the field, to the discipline, and for helping us consolidate our thoughts around this really delightful book. I advise all of you to read it. It's quite different in style, but also very accessible. Thank you for your excellent inputs, both Jo and Juha. This helps to move the debate forward and to stimulate the conversation. And with that, we are very happy to have had you on this IOE seminar. We managed to keep to the time and wish you all of the best as we continue to think about the various challenges that face us as evaluators and researchers. Thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
Thank you, Indran. Thank you, Juha and Jo. It was really great. Thank you. And the public, yes, the contributions.
Thank you, colleague.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All the best.